Good day, grade 12 students. This is the second virtual learning session for the subject Inquiries, Investigations, and Immersion. I am Jasper Angeles, your virtual teacher for this lesson. Last session, you were introduced to the writing of the title and the statement of the problem. I hope that you still remember the practical guidelines in writing these important elements of the research paper. Today, we shall talk about writing the research introduction and hypotheses. For us to know what is expected of us to do after this virtual learning session, let us take a look at our objectives. For this session, we aim to hit the following targets. Number 1, determine the rationale for an introduction. Number 2, apply the Pentagon Principle in assessing given introductions. 3, differentiate assumption from hypotheses. And lastly, differentiate directional from non-directional hypotheses. On top of these objectives, of course, it is expected that in the course of the discussion, you would learn the method and how the introduction and hypotheses are written. But before we go to the main course, let us first have this short review. Plus, your task here is to write the possible title for this research. Suppose a researcher is interested in studying teachers who use different methods in teaching. The researcher locates one teacher who lectures exclusively, another who botches or lectures with slides, films, and computer images, and a third who uses the case study method and lectures not at all. Let us say that you would like to see the effect of case study method in improving the learning retention of grade 7 students in Malinta National High School for school year 2018-2019. Again, you would like to see the effect of case study method in improving the learning retention of grade 7 students in Malinta National High School for school year 2018-2019. What could be the best possible title for this research? You have 30 seconds to answer. Please write your answer on the comment box below. Timer starts now. Alright, so what are your answers? If your answer is similar to this, the effect of case study in the lesson retention of grade 7 students in Malinta National High School school year 2018-2019, then you got the best possible title for this research endeavor. Note that you could use other research titles as long as they carry not only the variables but also the method the researcher intends to use. Here you can see that the two variables are case study method and lesson retention. The method, on the other hand, is obviously experimental method because of the word effect and because the situation tells us that the teaching methods as categorical variables will be manipulated, thus making methods an independent variable that could affect lesson retention, which in this case is a dependent variable. Now, so much for the review. I suggest that you rewatch the previous video if you missed important details. Before writing the introduction, we need to first ask ourselves the question, why do we have to do it? What do you think? Why is there a need for an introduction? Come on, write your answers in the comment box. Why do we need to write the research introduction? All right. I think that one of your answers would be that the introduction serves as a backgrounder for the reader, a portion in the research paper that gives the readers an idea as to what the research topic is all about. Note that to serve as a backgrounder is not the only purpose of the introduction. The primary job of this essential component is to lead the reader from a general subject area to a particular topic of inquiry. Here is a snippet of the introduction from the research entitled Utilizing Transformational Generative Grammar or TGG approach to improve students' linguistic performance. Note that the linguistic performance in the title was delimited to performance in transforming active to passive voice and vice versa. Let us read this part of the introduction. Forming grammatical sentences has always been one of the most difficult language skills to teach and to learn. The teaching of the passive voice, which requires sentence transformation with respect to tense in particular, is a tedious work. What have you noticed with the first sentence? Are the things mentioned in the first sentence likewise mentioned in the title? The answer is no. What the first sentence of the introduction did was to give readers an idea about the more general subject area that could be influenced given this research becomes successful. You will notice that the research is all about TGG approach and its use in teaching active to passive voice transformation. And yet, it began with a discussion of the difficulty in forming grammatical sentences. Why is this the case? Again, the introduction begins with the more general idea, narrowed to the specifics in a very gradual and coherent way. Saying something about the difficulty in forming grammatical sentences under the umbrella of difficulties in active to passive voice transformation even more makes the reader see that one's capability in active to passive voice transformation is as important as any other language skills to learn. Basically, we would like the readers to see the bigger problem and its connection to the specific problem we would like to address in our own research. Let us have another example. This snippet of the introduction comes from the study entitled The Relationship Between Self-Esteem and Facebook Likes of Senior High School Students in Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Valenzuela, school year 2018-2019. Looking at the title, you'll know what variables would be involved, right? Those would be self-esteem and Facebook likes. With these variables, you might be expecting the first paragraph will right away talk about these things, but reading this portion of the introduction would tend to lead you to think otherwise. Let me read this for you. The Knowledge 2018 stated that there are 1.32 billion daily active users of Facebook, and it is the most widely used social media platform worldwide. From this massive amount of users, 60% or almost 800 million are suffering from depression brought about by having low self-esteem that is rooted from gaining less support from the public or the netizens. What is the main subject if not the general subject area being presented by this introduction? Definitely, that general subject area would not be Facebook likes or self-esteem because there's something else being mentioned in this introduction. Write your answer on the comment box. Again, what do you think is that bigger problem? We're talking about the bigger problem or the more general subject area that the researcher emphasized here. Come on, comment your answers. Alright, so the more general topic being discussed here is depression. This clinical condition, according to the introduction, seems influenced by the use of social media and one's self-esteem. Again, we are given a sample portion of introduction that begins with the general going to the specific. The research is all about the relationship between self-esteem and Facebook likes, and yet the introduction began with a discussion of Facebook users and the growing number of people suffering from depression. This class is one of the things you should always remember when writing the introduction. You begin discussing about the more general topic from which the specific problem arises. Now, aside from introducing the general terms going to the specifics, the introduction establishes the scope, context, and significance of the research being conducted by summarizing current understanding and background information about the topic. Note that the scope and the limitations and significance of the study are not the only components of the research paper that can delimit the scope and determine the context for the research that will be or has been conducted. As a backgrounder, the research introduction gives the readers not only the general problem from which the specific one emerges, but also the place, the kind of people involved, the variables involved, and many others that secure the scope, context, and significance of the research to be or has been conducted. Another thing, class. Introductions state the purpose of the work in the form of the research problem supported by a hypothesis or a set of questions explaining briefly the methodological approach used in order to examine the research problem. This means to say that from the introduction alone, the readers must see already how significant the research is, the method that will be used to conduct the research successfully, and a hint as to what questions will be raised by the researcher in conducting the research. Lastly, introductions highlight the potential outcomes your study can reveal and outline the remaining structure and organization of the paper. Let me show you an example again from the research about relationship between self-esteem and Facebook likes. This paragraph here is one of the many that comprise the introduction of that research paper. Let me read this for you. Through these conclusions, parents and teachers would be able to see rationale in restricting use of social media at home and at school. Guidance counselors would likewise have basis in modifying the guidance and counseling programs at school. Learnings from the study are likewise significant in the field of mental health since low or high self-esteem may result in conditions requiring professional help. Now, which part of this paragraph tells you something about the potential outcomes of the study? We're talking about potential outcomes here, class. Right, kindly point out the potential outcomes being described or being mentioned in this paragraph on the study. Write your answers on the comment section. Remember that the research introduction should likewise inform its readers on the prospect outcomes of the study. So which are those? All right. So through the study on the relationship between self-esteem and Facebook likes, parents and teachers would be able to see number one, rationale in restricting use in social media or the use of social media at home and at school. Class, we always say that there's danger in using SOCMED too much, right? Probably, through this research, we can once and for all decide whether or not SOCMED is really dangerous for one's mental health. Another possible outcome could be the basis in modifying the guidance and counseling programs at school. If indeed SOCMED and self-esteem are correlated, then guidance counselors may consider interventions directed on SOCMED usage. Now, for us to prove that indeed the introduction helps in outlining the parts of the research paper, let us learn the elements of the research introduction. What are the elements of an introduction? How many elements do we have? Now, based on the picture that you can see right now, do you have any guess? Based on the picture, how many elements do we consider in writing the research introduction? If your answer is 5, you're correct. In writing the research introduction class, we follow the Pentagon principle, which is named, of course, after the picture that you can see right there, the Pentagon, or the headquarters building of the United States Department of Defense that has obviously 5 sides. All right. So given the introduction, or given that the introduction has 5 elements, it would be easy to guess that the number of paragraphs we will devote to this part of the paper will be, of course, 5 paragraphs. Note, however, that this is only a guide for beginning researchers like you. As you grow academically, it is expected that you will create your own way of writing the introduction. But for now, let us all agree that the introduction would ideally have 5 paragraphs that represent the 5 elements we will consider in a little while. Let us first have the first element. Now, before we proceed, I suggest that you consider taking down notes so that you would be able to see the connection between and among these elements. For us to know element 1, we have to think of the question that each paragraph answers. You may have already an idea on the question that each paragraph answers, for we have already discussed the rationale for having the research introduction. Again, in order for us to know the elements, you have to think of the question that each paragraph answers. So we have 5 paragraphs here, so there must be 5 questions, okay, that should be conceived in your mind. Before we proceed, note that we will be using the introduction from the research about the relationship between self-esteem and Facebook likes. This is the first paragraph that represents element 1. Let me read this for you. Denali 2018 stated that there are 1.32 billion daily active users of Facebook, and it is the most widely used social media platform worldwide. From this massive amount of users, 60% or almost 800 million are suffering from depression brought about by having low self-esteem that is rooted from gaining less support from the public or netizens. Furthermore, Burnett 2010 confirmed that unpopular students and those who achieve less number of likes and reactions on their Facebook posts see continuous failure academically and socially, which lead to both being the cause and effect of their negative self-esteem. In another way around, low self-esteem has something to do with the attainment of popularity. The study of Cornell 2012 found that unpopular students were distinguished by lower self-concepts and lower self-esteem. Now, what does this paragraph present us? What question does this answer? Please write your answer on the comment box. To help you with that, let's underline essential phrases. Okay, so in the context of this research, what do we call the underlined phrases now in the paragraph? Alright, so we have suffering from depression, going to number of likes, which leads to lower self-esteem. Alright, so these phrases, class, are the reasons why this research was or will be conducted. Again, what is the purpose of research? To provide solutions to what? Okay, comment your answers. To provide solutions to what? Alright, so the purpose of research, class, is of course to provide solutions to problems. So in general, we can say that the first paragraph represents element 1, which is the problem and the research topic. Going back to the paragraph, you can see that the general problem was suffering from depression, going to the specifics, which have something to do with the variables low self-esteem and the number of likes on Facebook. Again, element 1, problem and the research topic. The first paragraph shall talk of these two. Now let's have element 2. To identify this, we need to read the next paragraph in the same research. To better understand the connection between self-esteem and popularity in Facebook, the researchers in the present study would like to propose an investigation on the relationship of the people's level of self-esteem and number of likes in Facebook. As what was mentioned in the preceding paragraphs, one's low self-esteem may be attributed to his or her inability to be recognized in a particular setting. With the advent of these social media sites, young people found a way for them to gain or drain their self-esteem. Since liking is not incumbent and required in the Facebook community, one may lose self-esteem if what they believe as something likable about themselves turned out as unlikable for other people. It is for these reasons that one may assume that the level of self-esteem is dependent on the number of likes a person gets from his or her friends. Alright, so what question does this paragraph answer? To help you with that, let's once again highlight certain parts. Okay, so to better understand the connection between self-esteem and popularity in Facebook, the researchers in the present study would like to propose. Okay, so what question is being answered by this part? Come on, comment your answers. Remember that the first paragraph talks of the problem. Now, we get a sort of a proposal. So what question is being answered? If your answer is, what solution would the researchers propose or something similar to this, then you are certainly correct. This leads us to element number 2 or element 2, which is all about the proposed solution. So far, we have had two paragraphs already. The first being about the problem addressed, and the second, which is about the proposed solution. Let's have element number 3. Okay. All right. So here we will be reading again a snippet of the third paragraph from the same study. By determining whether or not there is a significant relationship between the level of self-esteem and number of likes, the researchers would be able to produce conclusions on the nature of self-esteem, how people see social media, the scope of social media's influence on its users. Through these conclusions, parents and teachers would be able to see rationale in restricting use of social media at home and at school. Guidance counselors would likewise have basis in modifying the guidance and counseling programs at school. Learnings from this study are likewise significant in the field of mental health since low or high self-esteem may result in conditions requiring professional help. Alright, so we're done with the problem and the proposed solution. Which question do you think does this paragraph answer? Write your answer in the comment box. Let me help you in writing your answer by showing you these underlined phrases. What do we call these, class? We have the proposed or the production of conclusions, the seeing of the rationale, and the basis in modifying a program. What do we call all of these? At the end, we were even given a clue that this research is significant in the field of mental health. Obviously, you can see here the possible outcomes of the study. In turn, these outcomes make the research significant. Of course, if there are no outcomes, then there's no significance in the research that you will conduct or that you have conducted. Now, if the research question or if the question conceiving in your head is, what is the significance of the study as a question to this paragraph or as a question to what this paragraph answers, then you are certainly correct. In short, element 3 is all about the significance of the study or the rationale. Now, we have the paragraph for the problem, the proposed solution, and the significance of the study. Which do you think will be for elements 4 and 5? To identify that, let's read this fourth paragraph from the same research. Though several previous researchers have already expounded on the possible effects of Facebook and other social networking sites on the self-esteem of its users, quantitative studies, especially using the correlational research method, was not yet utilized in determining whether or not self-esteem boosts or plummets based on the number of likes. In the present study, the researchers aim to produce an equation that would determine the level of self-esteem of a particular person based on his or her number of likes. Now, to help you in identifying the element concerned in this paragraph, let us underline essential words and phrases. Here we can see that the researchers use the word though to suggest that after careful survey of related studies related to the current study, there was something that was not yet explored by previous researchers. And what is this component that was explored little? Correct, the use of correlational method. What was not yet produced by previous researchers? Again, what was not yet produced by previous researchers? Correct again, an equation that would determine the level of self-esteem of a particular person based on his or her number of likes. Now, what do we call these outcomes, class, that did not emerge in the previous related studies and now we want to explore? What do we call these things which seem to be missing in the previous researches about the same topic? Come on, comment your answers. If your answer is research gap or research gaps, then you got this right. The question that this paragraph answers is, what are the gaps that the research wishes to fulfill? This leads us to conclude that element 4 is about the research gaps, aspects which were not covered by previous researchers. We're down to element 5, the fifth and last paragraph of the introduction. Let's read this. Putting an action on the proposed solution to the problem and further investigation of the problem involved, the researchers would employ empirical steps. First, the researcher would gather the respondents of the study. Next, appropriate instruments would be administered to identify the level of self-esteem and the number of Facebook likes of the respondents. Then, analysis of the gathered data would be conducted to present results, which in turn would be used to provide conclusions regarding the relationship of the two variables. Finally, recommendations could be written based or given the conclusions inferred from the study. Now, what question do you think that does this paragraph answers? Let us see the highlighted words and phrases, shall we? We have here the researchers would employ empirical steps in addition to the cohesive devices used for a sequence of steps. Now, did these words give you an idea which question is answered? Come on, write your answer on the comment box. If your answer had something to do with the outline of steps, then you got this right. Plus, remember that when writing the introduction, we think of 5 paragraphs that represent the 5 elements necessary to introduce the research problem we want to explore. We begin with the problem or the research topic, followed by the paragraph on the proposed solution to this problem. As for the third element, we write the third paragraph with emphasis on the rationale or significance of the study. Now, you also have to remember that a good researcher bases his or her study on the gaps or unaddressed concerns of previous researchers. In this way, scholastic connection is achieved. It is for this reason that in the introduction we devote a paragraph solely for gaps discovered by the researcher from reading previous studies. Lastly, in writing the introduction, we give the readers a hint on the outline of steps we would like to take in order to provide answer or to provide the veracity to the proposed solution to the problem and to cover the gaps we found in the previous researchers or the previous researches rather. Note that we're not yet talking about the detailed steps here, so do not write the detailed steps on the outline of steps. Just write the steps in a very general way, in the same way that you have seen in the sample. Alright, so that you won't forget the discussion we have had for the research introduction, let's answer a few questions. Alright, so I hope that you really listened to the discussion and with that attitude, I think that you'd be able to answer these easy questions. Please write your answers on the comment box, class. Let us begin with an easy one. How many paragraphs are there in the introduction? You have 10 seconds to answer this. Go. Alright. So if your answer is 5, then you are correct. Now let's have another question. What is the main idea of each paragraph? You mentioned a while ago that there are 5 paragraphs in the introduction. So what's the main idea of each paragraph? Write your answer on the comment box. You have 30 seconds. Go. Alright, so we have paragraph 1, which is about the research problem. The second, which is about the proposed solution. The third as one devoted to the significance of the study. The fourth being the discussion of or the discussion on the gaps of previous researches. And the fifth or the last paragraph as the one that tells the outline of steps the researcher will take to accomplish the proposed solution and cover the gaps from the previous studies. Now, all in all, what is the pattern of writing the introduction based on the given introduction? Again, what is the pattern of writing the introduction based on the given introduction? Alright, so what do we call this pattern? You have 10 seconds. Go. Okay, good. It is the Pentagon method representing the 5 elements of the research introduction. Now, let us proceed with the writing of the research hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? Before we answer that question, let us look at sample hypotheses from a sample of conducted studies. Let us have this hypothesis from this research entitled Room Temperature as a Factor to Examination Scores. Before I read the sample hypothesis, note that the hypothesis is written only for questions or research questions that need inferential statistics to produce an answer. This question here that you can see on the screen is an example of such that needs inferential statistics for the answer to come up. There's no way of knowing if there is a significant difference between the examination scores of the respondents who took the test in the cold and warm rooms, let us say, without the t-test. Alright, so in order for this question to make sense, it must be aligned with a certain and appropriate statistical tool, which in this case refer to inferential statistics. Now, going back to what I said, this research would have a hypothesis since there is a question that may only be answered, remember this, and a question that may only be answered using inferential stats and or correlation stats. For this research question, we have the hypothesis. There is a significant difference between the examination scores of the respondents who took the test in the cold and warm rooms. How is this research, or how about this research entitled Variation in the Salaries of Nurses in the Philippines 2018 to 2019? For the question, here's the question, is the average salary of nurses greater than the standard salary mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment? The hypothesis is the average salary of nurses is greater than the standard salary mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment. Given these examples, I believe that you have now an idea on how hypotheses are written. We'll go there, but for now, let's formally define a hypothesis. Class, a hypothesis is a prediction of the possible outcomes of a study. In other words, a hypothesis is the same as prediction. The question now is, what makes a hypothesis different from an assumption? Let us look at how they are presented. For assumption, we assume that if you're good in mathematics, you're likewise good in science. If this assumption was written as hypothesis, then this could be the way it is presented. We assume that there's a significant relationship between the academic achievements of the respondents in mathematics and science. Now, let's lay them here. Class, which of the two is clear? By clear, we should be looking for the one which states evidence to consider that if you're good in math, then you are likewise good in science. Obviously, it's the hypothesis that's clear because there was a set of data involved, and that is the academic achievement of the respondents in math and science. Here we can consider that both assumptions or both assumption and hypothesis are making assumptions. Again, Both the assumption and the hypothesis are making assumptions. But it is the hypothesis that makes the assumption clear. That is by identifying the ground to establish similarity between math and science achievement. How about this? Which of the two is testable? If the statement is testable, then that should include data that will be tested. Otherwise, nothing can be tested. Which of the two possesses that set of data that can be tested? Again, obviously, it's the hypothesis. Here we see that the assumption tells that similarity in being good in math and science is possible, but this does not tell us how are we to determine if this statement is true or not. Now, in the case of hypothesis, we look for significant relationship which is based on computation from a test and a set of data that can be tested. Hypothesis class is also an assumption but a clear and a testable assumption. In a nutshell, we can say that both hypothesis and assumption are assumptions. They differ only in the way they are presented. The hypothesis is a specific, objective, and testable assumption. Without these characteristics, an assumption is reduced to an assumption, or the hypothesis would be reduced to an assumption that cannot be investigated. Another thing, if we have a hypothesis, we attempt to falsify it. Based on the computed stat value and the given critical value, we can determine the truthfulness or how true the research hypothesis is. Since the assumptions cannot be tested, we can never be sure if that assumption or if these assumptions are true or not. What happens is that we accept the risk of believing in that assumption and move on if it's not true. So that's the breaking point of between hypothesis and assumption. The hypothesis is something that can be tested, while assumption may not be tested. And if we are not, or if the assumption is not true, then we will move on with it. All right. So there is no need for us to even more establish the veracity or the falsity of that assumption, unlike in hypotheses. Now that you have the knowledge of the difference between an assumption and a hypothesis, let's determine the two kinds of hypotheses. Again, we have here the research question from which these two hypotheses that you can see on the screen were derived. Alright, so the question is there a significant relationship between the academic achievements of the respondents in mathematics and science? The hypotheses are, number one, there is no significant relationship between the academic achievements of the respondents in mathematics and science. And the second one, there is a significant relationship between the academic achievements of the respondents in mathematics and science. What is the difference between these two hypotheses here? Come on, comment your answers. Again, what's the difference between these two hypotheses? Which word in the first hypothesis is not anymore observed in the second one? Come on, comment your answers. Alright, if you're thinking about this, then I think we are on the same page. The one that begins with there is no significant relationship is what we call the null hypothesis, or in the symbol or in symbol, this is H sub 0 or H0. While the one that begins with there is a significant relationship is what we call alternative hypothesis, or in symbol H sub A or H sub 1, HA or H1. Alright, so now let's practice writing these two kinds of hypotheses. Alright, so based on the one that you have seen a while ago, I think that you'd be able to right away write the two hypotheses. The research question is there a significant difference between the examination scores of the respondents who took the test in the cold and warm rooms? What should be the two hypotheses here? Alright, so you should have a null and an alternative hypothesis. Write your answer on the comment box. Timer starts now. All right. So again, we have the null and the alternative hypothesis. For the null hypothesis, it must be there is no significant difference between the examination scores of the respondents who took the test in the cold and warm rooms. All right, and for the alternative hypothesis, we have there is no significance, or sorry, there is a significant difference between the examination scores of the respondents who took the test in the cold and warm rooms. Please omit the question marks there. That those question marks should be replaced with periods. Note that this is an easy task because you just have to write the null and its counterpart, right? Usually the null begins with there is no. How about this one? The question is the average salary of nurses greater than the standard salary mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment? How will you write your null and alternative hypothesis here? To answer this, let's have another question to answer. What is the opposite of greater than or less than? Come on, comment your answers. Again, what's the opposite of greater than or less than? Obviously, for the alternative hypothesis, we will be using greater than or less than. But how about the null hypothesis? Remember that the null hypothesis is the counterpart, okay, of the alternative hypothesis. Again, what's the opposite of greater than or less than? If your answer is equal to, then you are certainly correct. Now, let's get back to the research question a while ago. Can you write now the two hypotheses for this research question? Again, I will be giving you 30 seconds to do that. Timer starts now. All right. So for the null hypothesis, we have, okay, H0. The average salary of nurses is equal to the standard salary mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment, while for the HA or H1 or the alternative hypothesis, the answer is the average salary of nurses is greater than the standard salary mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment. I hope that we had the same answers. Now we're done knowing what hypotheses are, how different are they from assumptions, and how they're usually written. Now let us proceed to the other types of hypotheses. To know this, let us once again look at these hypotheses. How do they differ, class? Or to be specific, which of the two is directional and non-directional? Again, kindly look at these hypotheses here. Which is directional and which is non-directional? Alright, again, which of the two is directional and non-directional? Which is directional, the first one or the second one? How about non-directional? Alright, we have the first one as directional, while the second one as non-directional. Let us see the reasons why. Class, directional hypothesis indicates the specific direction such as higher, lower, more or less, higher than, lower than, more than, or less than. Alright, this specific direction that a researcher expects to emerge in a relationship. So the researcher is already expecting a certain relationship. Either it's going to be higher or lower. While non-directional hypothesis does not make a specific prediction about what direction the outcome of a study will take. So there is no wording such as higher or equal to, no? All right. So for non-directional, it's either higher or lower. There is no prediction as to the outcome of the study. Now, let's put this in predicting whether a man or the man in the picture will turn right or left. Now, if you have a non-directional hypothesis, you consider and put equal weight on assuming he will either turn right or turn left. If your hypothesis is directional, you either assume that the man is definitely going to the right or not and not going to the left. Right? It's either he's going to the right or not going to the right. Right? Or that the man is definitely going to the left and not to the right, or else he would not really turn. Alright? So in short, there is only one direction for a directional hypothesis like in this example. An admission officer in the university claims that the overall mean score of all applicants who are admitted in the university is less than the mean score of applicants who are admitted in an accounting course. In a sample of 35 applicants' entrance scores, the mean score and standard deviation are 112, respectively. Thus, the admission officers claim at 0.05 level of significance that the mean score of the applicants who are admitted in an accounting course is 109. The claim here is that the overall mean score of all applicants who are admitted in the university is less than the mean score of applicants who are admitted in the accounting course. There is indeed a direction for the hypothesis. It's either less than or not less than. Okay, if it's not less than, then it's equal to. Alright, so there could only be two kinds of hypotheses here. Alright, it's either the overall mean score of the applicants who are admitted is less than the mean score admitted in the accounting course, or the overall mean score of all applicants admitted in the university is equal to the mean score of those who were admitted to the accounting course. Now, this particular kind of hypothesis, this directional hypothesis, is very much different from the non-directional hypothesis. All right, so let's have an example. An admission officer in a university claims that the overall mean score of applicants who are admitted in the university is different. All right. Take note that the admission officer here did not think, okay, that the overall mean score is less than or greater than. Okay, there is no particular direction, no? There is no particular prediction as to the outcome. Okay, so it's different from the mean score of applicants who are admitted in an accounting course. Given the set of values provided, test admission officers claim a 0.05 level of significance. Here, the claim is that there is a significant difference between the two groups. It could happen that the overall mean score of all applicants who are admitted in the university is higher or lower than the mean score of applicants who are admitted in an accounting course. Higher or lower, in other words, no particular course of direction. Alright, let's have some practice. Here, all you have to do is determine the type of hypothesis. Okay? Which hypothesis is this? Is it directional or non-directional? Write the HO or the null hypothesis and the HA or the H1 or the alternative hypothesis. Let me read this for you. The researcher reports that the average salary of a teacher is more than 25,000 pesos. A sample of teachers who has a mean score, a sample of 30 teachers has a mean salary of 26,200. At alpha 0.05, test the claim that teachers earn more than 25,000 pesos a month. The standard deviation of the population is 4,800. Now, is it non-directional, or is the hypothesis that we can create from this research question directional or non-directional? What is going to be the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis? Okay, you have 30 seconds to write your answer on the comment box. Again, write, okay, if this is directional or non-directional, and then add information as to the null and alternative hypothesis for this research question. 30 seconds, timer starts now. Right. So, if your answer is directional, then you are right. The null hypothesis must be the average of or the average salary of teachers is equal to 25,000, while the alternative hypothesis must be the average salary of teachers is more than 25,000 pesos. Now, I guess given the fruitful and comprehensive discussion we had, you already know the answer to these questions. Do yourself a favor by answering these questions independently. This would help you a lot in the tasks that would be given in line with the two topics we have already had today. I hope that in the course of this virtual learning session, you have been acquainted once again with the intricacies of research writing. I hope that you'd be able to ace the writing of the introduction of the research paper and the hypothesis of your own study. Once again, this is Jasper Angeles, your virtual teacher for inquiries, investigations, and immersion. See you again next time.